Deep in the heart of Aotearoa, New Zealand's ancient landscapes, there lies a story few have ever heard, a secret whispered by the winds and carved into the sacred stones of the Maori people. Imagine standing before a towering waka, an ancestral canoe, its wooden hull etched with symbols so mysterious that even modern scholars struggle to decode their full meaning. This is just one of the countless enigmas left behind by the Maori, a culture so rich, so deeply connected to land and spirit, that its true depths remain hidden beneath layers of time. Today, we're pulling back the veil on 30 forgotten secrets of the ancient Maori people, stories, traditions, and artifacts that have been overshadowed by the more familiar tales, but hold the key to understanding a legacy unlike any other. Think you know the Maori? Think again. Beyond the iconic haka and the breathtaking hongi greeting lies a world of untold wisdom, lost navigation techniques rivaling modern GPS, hidden sanctuaries where spiritual leaders communed with the divine, and forgotten chants capable of summoning the raw power of nature itself. These aren't just fragments of history, they're living echoes of a people who saw the world in ways we're only beginning to comprehend. Their knowledge of the stars, their mastery of ocean currents, even their ability to heal with plants modern science has yet to fully study. Each revelation rewrites what we thought we knew. This isn't just a journey into the past, it's an invitation to walk alongside the ancestors, to feel the weight of their wisdom, and to uncover truths that have been waiting centuries to be rediscovered. From the sacred peaks of Taranaki to the secluded valleys of the Yawara, we're diving into the shadows of history to bring these 30 secrets into the light. So take a moment, listen closely, because by the time we're done, you'll never look at the Maori or the world they shaped the same way again. The story starts now. The Ngāi Tahu people carried their history not in books, but in the depths of memory-spoken lineages stretching back countless generations, each name a thread woven into the vast tapestry of whakapapa. These genealogies were far more than family trees. They were living maps linking individuals to their ancestors, to the mountains and rivers that bore witness to their journeys, and to the very spirit of the land itself. A master of whakapapa could trace a line of descent through hundreds of names, connecting the present to the ancient past with the precision of a star navigator charting a course across the ocean. But time, displacement, and the fading voices of elders have left gaps in these sacred chains, fragments of memory waiting to be reclaimed. Imagine the weight of that loss, not just missing names, but severed ties to stories that explained how a family came to guard a particular stretch of coast, or why a certain bend in the river held healing power. Some whakapapa branches stretched back to the Great Migration Waka, the canoes that first brought ancestors to Aotearoa, while others held the key to understanding alliances between tribes or the origins of sacred rituals. Without them, it's like losing pages from a grand epic where every detail matters. Yet today, Ngāi Tahu scholars and storytellers are piecing together these fractured lineages with the patience of archaeologists reassembling a shattered vase. They scour century-old land court records where ancestors testified under oath, painstakingly comparing notes with other tribes whose whakapapa might overlap. They listen to the crackling recordings of elders who spoke into microphones decades ago, preserving what they could. Sometimes a single name remembered by a komatua, an elder, becomes the missing link that reconnects an entire branch of the family. The work isn't just about the past, it's healing for the living. When a young person learns their whakapapa, it's as if the ancestors themselves reach forward to say, "This is where you belong." Rivers they've crossed their whole lives suddenly have new meaning. Hills they've seen in the distance now hold the names of forebears who walked their generations before. It's a homecoming without travel, a reminder that the land remembers even when people forget. And as these genealogies are restored, so too is the strength of a people who refuse to let their stories fade into silence. Every line carved into the skin told a story, not with ink but with the chisel's bite. The moko, the sacred facial tattoos of the Maori, were never mere decoration. They were living archives, each curve and spiral a coded language declaring who you were, where you came from, and what you'd survived. While many recognized the striking beauty of these patterns, few grasped the layers of meaning hidden within them. A single design could reveal a warrior's victories in battle, a navigator's mastery of the stars, or even a whispered warning to rivals. This one carries the strength of their ancestors. Take the koru, the unfurling fern frond often seen curling across cheeks or brows. To outsiders, it might seem like a simple motif, but to the Maori, it symbolized new beginnings, a life reborn after great trials. A chief bearing this pattern near the eye might have led their people through famine or war, emerging with wisdom as tender yet resilient as the fern's first growth. Then there were the intricate puhoro designs, thunderbolt-like grooves sweeping down the thighs, reserved for those who'd proven themselves in swift, decisive action. These weren't just badges of honor, they were maps of the soul etched where the world could see, but some messages were meant only for those who knew how to look. A subtle break in a line, a space left deliberately unfilled, these could signal hidden grief, like the loss of a child or a betrayal by kin. Other patterns, like the Aotearoa covering a man's full face, declared his readiness to speak for his tribe, while the moko koi on a woman's chin narrated her lineage, her right to speak on sacred matters. Even the placement held power. Tattoos closer to the nose indicated authority passed down through generations, while those near the hairline often marked spiritual leaders who'd communed with the gods. Today, modern scholars are piecing together fragments of this fading language, comparing century-old sketches with oral histories passed down in whispers. Some designs, once thought lost, have been rediscovered in the journals of early European explorers who, unaware of their significance, meticulously recorded them as curiosities. Others survive in the weathered skin of elders, their tattoos now fragile as parchment. For the Maori, reviving these patterns isn't just about reclaiming art, it's about hearing the voices of ancestors who still speak through the sacred geometry of skin. Every restored line is a bridge across time, a reminder that identity is never just worn. It's carved into the very bones of history. Long before compasses or GPS lit the way across the ocean, the Maori read the night sky like a map written in starlight. Their ancestors crossed thousands of nautical miles in waka, guided not by chance but by an intricate understanding of celestial bodies most of us would struggle to name today. Unlike the Polynesian wayfinders who followed a set star compass, the Maori developed their own unique system woven into chants, etched into carvings, and memorized by navigators who could read the heavens as easily as we read street signs. Take the constellation Aotearoa, the Milky Way, which wasn't just a shimmering band of light but a celestial pathway. Navigators knew that when Aotearoa arched high overhead, it signaled the optimal season for long voyages. Certain stars, like Atutahi Canopus, acted as fixed markers on moving sentinels in the southern sky that helped realign a canoe's course even in stormy darkness. But the true genius lay in their lunar calendar, Maramatoka. Unlike modern calendars tracking rigid months, it followed the moon's phases, tying each night to specific activities, when to plant, when to fish, and most crucially, when to sail. A full moon meant bright nights for reading wave patterns, while a new moon's darkness signaled treacherous currents best avoided, yet the stars were only part of the story. Navigators paired celestial knowledge with an almost supernatural awareness of ocean swells, bird flight paths, even the taste of the wind. They could detect distant land by the way clouds clustered on the horizon or by the sudden appearance of certain seabirds at dawn. The waka itself became an instrument, its whole vibrations telling navigators if they'd strayed into unfavorable currents. This wasn't guesswork, it was a science honed over generations, where every ripple in the water and shift in the breeze carried meaning. What's haunting is how much of this expertise slipped away. After European arrival, metal tools and sextants replaced star paths, and by the late 19th century, few retained the full depth of this knowledge. But fragments survived in unexpected places, elders' chants describing star sequences, carvings of constellations on meeting house rafters, even children's lullabies referencing navigational markers. Today, Maori scholars and sailors are stitching these clues back together, relearning what it means to steer by the stars. Some have even replicated ancient voyages using only these techniques, proving what was once dismissed as legend, that their ancestors didn't just cross the Pacific. They conversed with it. Among the towering forests and mist-shrouded peaks of Aotearoa, certain stones were never just rocks, they were living vessels of power. The Maori called these sacred markers tapu, a word that carried the weight of both reverence and warning. To touch one without permission wasn't just disrespectful, it could unleash consequences beyond human understanding. These stones weren't placed randomly. They marked boundaries between the ordinary and the divine, sites where the veil between worlds grew thin. Some radiated healing energy, capable of curing ailments when approached with the proper karakia or incantations. Others guarded secrets so potent that disturbing them was said to bring ruin to entire lineages. Take the legendary watu, smooth stones employed by tohunga, spiritual experts, in rituals of healing. Placed on a patient's body, these stones were believed to draw out illness like a magnet pulling iron from sand. There are accounts of warriors with grievous wounds recovering overnight after such treatments, their fever broken by the stone's cool touch and the whispered prayers that activated its power. But the same stone, if mishandled, could become a conduit for misfortune. Elders spoke of families who'd ignored tapu and suffered years of drought, sickness, or inexplicable accidents until the stones were returned with elaborate ceremonies of apology. Then there were the pohaku, darker stones placed at burial grounds or battle sites. These weren't merely memorials, they were living guardians. Disturbing one was said to awaken the wrath of tupuna, ancestors whose spirits lingered close. European settlers, unaware of their significance, sometimes removed these stones for construction only to face bizarre setbacks. Tools breaking without cause, livestock vanishing, or sudden illnesses with no explanation. Some Maori quietly attribute modern landslides near disturbed sites not to geology, but to the stone's lingering displeasure. But perhaps most fascinating are the kauhotu tipua, the trickster stones. These rare formations were believed to shift position on their own, appearing in places no human could have moved them. Some say they marked portals where spirits cross into our world, while others insist they were sentinels left by the patupea, the elusive fairy folk of Maori lore. Even today, hikers occasionally report finding stones arranged in patterns too precise to be natural, yet unseen on previous visits. What's striking is how these beliefs persist. In remote valleys, you'll still find offerings, fresh leaves, carved tokens left beside certain stones by locals who know their history. Modern science might dismiss such practices as superstition, but for the Maori, the stones are a reminder that the land isn't passive. It watches, it remembers, and in places where the old power lingers, it still has the final say. Beneath the soaring rafters of a war whakairo, every beam, every panel, every inch of carved surface hummed with stories. These meeting houses were far more than shelters, they were living libraries, their wooden pages etched with genealogies, battles, and the wisdom of generations. While visitors might admire the craftsmanship, few realized that each swirl and figure was a deliberate choice, a memory made tangible. The master carvers who shaped them didn't just work with wood, they were historians, theologians, and artists fused into one. Consider the pair, the intricately carved lintel above the entrance. To the untrained eye, it might resemble an abstract pattern, but to the initiated, it was a manifesto. The central figure, often a forbidding ancestor with curled tongue, wasn't merely decorative, it was a challenge. That protruding tongue warned visitors to check their intentions before crossing the threshold, while the surrounding designs hinted at the tribe's founding narrative. A series of interlocking spirals might trace a migration voyage, while flanking figures could represent allies or vanquished foes. Some pair even hid riddles, like a small, overlooked detail revealing the tribe's sacred mountain or the true name of a hero whose identity was too tapu to speak aloud. Step inside, and the walls themselves seem to breathe with ancestral presence. The pupu, the carved pillars lining the interior, weren't uniform. Each told a distinct chapter of the tribe's saga. One might depict Rongamai, the god of cultivated foods, his eyes deliberately wide to symbolize abundance, while another showed a scowling warrior with a missing finger, a silent testament to a long-ago battle where sacrifice turned the tide. Even the spacing between figures held meaning. Tight clusters signaled eras of conflict, while generous gaps marked periods of peace and prosperity. The most skilled carvers embedded layers of knowledge, designing certain patterns to catch the morning sun on specific dates, aligning the house with celestial events like Matariki, the Maori New Year. Yet for all their precision, some messages were never meant to be permanent. The back panels, often facing away from the entrance, occasionally featured perishing carvings, deliberately fragile designs meant to erode over decades. These were stories too painful or sacred to endure, like records of defeats or forbidden romances, allowed to fade as the generations who remembered them passed on. Other techniques were lost entirely, like the use of rare pigments mixed with shark oil to make certain figures glow faintly in firelight, or the practice of embedding fragments of ancestral bone within key carvings to bind their mana to the structure. The tragedy lies in how much has vanished. Colonial laws once banned the construction of war whakairo, dismissing them as pagan relics. Fires, both accidental and deliberate, consumed irreplaceable masterpieces. Some carvers took their knowledge to the grave, their apprentices lost to war or disease before the full teachings could be passed down. Today, restoration efforts rely on faded photographs, missionary sketches, and the faint memories of elders who glimpsed these houses in childhood. But in scattered valleys, new war whakairo rise, their carvings a blend of recovered tradition and modern interpretation. Each fresh chisel stroke is an act of defiance, a declaration that the stories aren't finished yet. The Tohunga spoke in a language the earth itself seemed to understand, words that could stitch wounds closed without touch, summon rain from cloudless skies, or hush a storm with a whisper. These spiritual experts weren't merely healers or priests. They were living bridges between the physical and unseen worlds, their knowledge so potent it was often guarded like a hidden flame. Their most powerful tool wasn't herb or stone, but karakia, the sacred chants passed down through generations in hushed tones. Each syllable carried mana, a spiritual force that could reshape reality when uttered with the right intention and rhythm. Consider the karakia rongoa, healing incantations so precise that mispronouncing a single vowel could render them useless. Some were sung over crushed leaves to create poultices that mended broken bones in weeks, while others were breathed directly into a patient's palms to halt infections modern medicine would struggle with. There are accounts of Tohunga healing severe burns by reciting verses while tracing the outline of the injury in the air, never touching the skin, yet leaving behind healed tissue as if the fire had never touched them. But the true mastery lay in the pauses between words. Elders claimed the silence held as much power as the sounds themselves, a space where the atua, the gods, could whisper back. Divination was another realm entirely. Tohunga, skilled in matakite, the art of foresight, used karakia to interpret signs invisible to others. A flicker in a candle's flame, the pattern of bones tossed onto a woven mat, even the way morning mist curled around a mountaintop, all held messages. One particular chant, the Karakia Tirohanga, was said to open the third eye, allowing the Tohunga to glimpse fragments of the future. There's a story of a priest who foresaw a shipwreck days before it happened, warning his village to store extra food. When the stranded sailors arrived starving, they were met with prepared feasts as if the land itself had anticipated their need. Yet the darkest knowledge was reserved for communication with the dead. The Karakia Tupapaku enabled Tohunga to guide wandering spirits to the afterlife or, in rare cases, summon them for counsel. These chants were never written, only memorized, and only recited in places where the veil between worlds was thin burial caves, certain bends in rivers, or beneath ancient trees with roots said to touch the underworld. Mistakes were unthinkable. An incomplete chant might leave a spirit trapped between realms or, worse, attract something that wasn't meant to return. Colonization sought to erase this wisdom. Missionaries dismissed Karakia as pagan sorcery, banning their use and burning records where they could. Many Tohunga took their most sacred chants to the grave rather than risk them being misused. But fragments survived in unexpected ways. A fishing prayer disguised as a lullaby, a planting chant preserved as a children's counting game. Today, tribal historians painstakingly reconstruct these fragments, cross-referring missionary diaries where observers unwittingly transcribed Karakia they didn't understand. Some elders, though hesitant at first, have begun teaching select chants to new generations, ensuring the language of the Tohunga doesn't fade into silence. What's striking is how modern science occasionally stumbles upon echoes of this lost knowledge. Researchers studying sound therapy now acknowledge certain frequencies can accelerate healing, while quantum physicists debate whether consciousness truly affects matter, ideas the Tohunga would have recognized instantly. Perhaps their greatest secret wasn't the chants themselves, but the understanding that words, when infused with enough belief, can bend the world. Beneath the frost-covered fields of Aotearoa, an underground network of survival lay hidden, not tunnels or tombs, but vast larders carved into the earth itself. The Maori didn't just endure winter, they outsmarted it, engineering subterranean storage systems so effective that centuries-old kumara could emerge still edible. These weren't crude holes in the ground. The Yua, as they were called, were feats of precision, cool, dry chambers shaped like inverted gourds, their walls lined with woven flax and fern to regulate humidity. A single pit could hold enough sweet potatoes to feed a village for months, preserving them so well that explorers in the 1800s reported finding caches from pre-contact times, their contents mysteriously free of rot. But the true genius lay in the details. Each Yua's depth was calculated to tap into the Earth's natural insulation, staying just above the water table but below the frost line. The entrance, often facing south to avoid the sun's warmth, was sealed with fitted wooden doors and layers of packed clay, a barrier against rodents and mold. Some Yua incorporated hidden ventilation shafts disguised as tree roots, allowing air to circulate without compromising temperature. And the kumara weren't just dumped inside. They were arranged in elaborate lattice patterns, separated by bracken fronds treated with antimicrobial resins from the tarata tree. This wasn't storage, it was biochemistry avant la lettre. Above ground, the patoka elevated storehouses guarded against different threats. Perched on carved stilts too smooth for rats to climb, these wooden vaults held dried fish, fermented birds preserved in their own fat, and seed stocks for future planting. The most sacred patoka were tapu, their undersides decorated with fearsome carvings to deter thieves. But the real security system was subtler. The floors were designed to creak under any unfamiliar footstep, while the rafters housed trained cocker parrots that would shriek at intruders. What's haunting is how much of this knowledge vaporized. European settlers, accustomed to granaries and cellars, dismissed Yua as primitive pits, filling them in for farmland. The introduction of metal tools and imported crops made labor-intensive storage seem obsolete. Yet when early colonists faced disastrous harvests, some quietly turned to Maori elders, relearning fragments of these techniques to survive. Today, archaeologists using ground-penetrating radar keep uncovering lost Yua networks. some spanning entire valleys, while agricultural researchers study their passive cooling principles for modern food resilience. The ancestors didn't just bury food, they buried a masterclass in sustainability, waiting for us to dig it back up. The battlefield was silent before the first strike, not with the clang of metal, but the whisper of seasoned wood cutting through air. Whakapapa, the sacred art of Maori stick fighting, wasn't just combat. It was a dance of strategy, spirituality, and lethal precision. Warriors trained for years to master its rhythms, learning to read an opponent's intentions in the shift of a foot or the twitch of a wrist. Unlike European swordplay, where brute force often decided outcomes, Whakapapa demanded a fusion of grace and cunning. A master could disarm an adversary with a flick of the wrist, using their own momentum against them, or deliver a crippling blow with a teaha's razor-sharp tongue, all while reciting ancestral chants to steady their focus. These techniques weren't taught openly. Elders passed them down in secluded groves or moonlit clearings, often under vows of secrecy. The most advanced maneuvers, like the whakairo, a deceptive feint where the warrior appeared to retreat only to spin back with a devastating strike, were reserved for those who'd proven their discipline and loyalty. Training began with unarmed forms, teaching warriors to anticipate attacks by feeling vibrations through the earth before advancing to weapons. The mere act of selecting a weapon held meaning. Shorter patu clubs suited close-quarters combat, while the long teaha demanded space to unleash its sweeping arcs. Each weapon had its own whare, or spirit, and warriors spoke of them as living extensions of their ancestors' will. But the true genius of Whakapapa lay in its psychological warfare. Before physical contact, combatants engaged in a haka specially designed for battle, not the ceremonial versions seen today. These were personalized performances meant to unnerve, with warriors contorting their faces into grotesque masks, rolling their eyes back to show the whites, and using guttural growls to mimic the voices of ancestral spirits. Opponents who hesitated, even for a heartbeat, were already lost. The art's philosophy held that victory wasn't just about landing blows, but breaking an enemy's resolve, turning their fear into a weapon against them. What's tragic is how much was nearly erased. Colonial authorities, threatened by the skill of Maori warriors, banned the practice outright, forcing it underground. Some masters disguised training as folk dances, embedding combat stances into seemingly innocent performances. Others buried their sacred weapons rather than surrender them. Today's revivalists painstakingly reconstruct lost techniques from cryptic carvings like those on ancient pataka panels depicting duels, or from the journals of early missionaries who recorded fights they didn't understand. A few elders still guard the deepest secrets, waiting for the right students to prove themselves worthy. Modern martial artists are only beginning to grasp the sophistication of these methods. Biomechanical studies reveal that the teaha's spinning strikes generate force comparable to a baseball bat swung at full speed, while the footwork patterns align with principles modern sports science now champions for agility. But perhaps the greatest lesson of Whakapapa isn't in its physicality, but in its reminder that true mastery lies where mind, body, and spirit move as one. The warriors didn't just fight, they composed poetry in motion, each movement a stanza in an epic their ancestors could still hear. Beneath the glow of the Marimataka moon, some Maori legends were whispered only when the fire burned low, stories of love so fierce it defied the boundaries between worlds. These weren't fairy tales, they were sacred warnings and celebrations of passion woven into the fabric of tribal memory. Take the tale of Hain Moa and Tutinkai, a romance that still ripples across Lake Rotorua's waters. Separated by warring tribes, Hain Moa famously swam across the lake guided only by the sound of her lover's flute, her body painted with luminous algae to ward off vengeful spirits. But what most retellings omit is the perilous karakia she recited mid-swim, a chant to quiet the taniwa lurking beneath her, promising her soul would belong to the water if her love wasn't pure. Then there were the unions that crossed realms entirely, like the Patupea maiden who lured a mortal hunter into the mist-cloaked hills of the Yowara. For 3 lunar cycles, they lived in a twilight world where time bent like river reeds until he broke the taboo of bringing cooked food back to her realm. The resulting clash between human heat and fairy magic scattered their descendants, said to be the ancestors of those with preternatural healing gifts today. Such stories weren't just romantic, they encoded cultural boundaries. The moment a lover ignored tapu, whether by stealing a glance at a sacred spring or whispering a name too loudly, the tragedy unfolded, reinforcing that desire unchecked by wisdom brought ruin. More chilling were the tales of Aotearoa, love songs with power beyond melody. Certain chants, when sung with full intensity, could summon a lover across impossible distances, but at a cost. In one account, a woman's voice carried so far it woke her drowned husband from his reef burial cave. Their single night together left her hair white as Pa's shell, a visceral reminder that not all reunions belong to the living. Even now, some elders caution against singing old love songs near bodies of water, lest the wrong ears hear. Perhaps the most poignant were the secret bonds between mortal women and taniwa, the water guardians often mislabeled as monsters. Tribal histories speak of women who vanished into whirlpools, only to reappear years later with children whose eyes reflected underwater currents. These weren't kidnappings but choices, records of those who traded human society for a love that demanded whole worlds be left behind. Their descendants were said to inherit the ability to predict floods or commune with marine life, bloodlines where the boundary between human and elemental blurred. Today, these narratives live in fragments, a line of an old waiata, a carving of intertwined figures on a meeting house beam, or the way certain families still avoid eating fish from specific streams where their ancestors made supernatural vows. Modern retellings often sanitize the endings, but the original lessons were stark. Love could be as destructive as it was glorious, and the heart's choices ripple through generations. To hear these stories isn't just entertainment. It's to understand a culture that saw romance as the ultimate act of bravery, a leap into waters where not even the stars knew the depth. In the dense forests of Aotearoa, where voices could vanish between towering trunks, the Maori perfected an ancient language that wasn't spoken, it was whistled, clicked, and trilled. Before radios or written messages, they learned to mimic the cries of native birds with such precision that they could send complex signals across valleys without alerting prey or enemies. This wasn't mere imitation, it was a sophisticated system of communication where every pitch and rhythm carried meaning. The kokoko's haunting organ-like notes might signal danger, while the tui's metallic chatter could coordinate a hunting party's movements. Some calls were so finely tuned that listeners could distinguish between a real bird and a human sending a message, a skill that took years of practice to master. The art extended beyond utility into the spiritual. Certain bird calls were considered sacred, believed to carry the voices of ancestors when replicated under ritual conditions. Tohunga trained in the deepest forests would spend weeks in isolation, studying a single species until they could mirror not just the sound but the intention behind it. There are accounts of experts who could converse with birds, luring them close enough to touch with sequences of calls passed down through generations. One legendary tale speaks of a scout who mimicked a riroriro's song to guide his lost war party home through a moonless night, each chirp a beacon in the dark. Yet the most astonishing use was in hunting. Unlike European falconry, where birds were trained to serve humans, the Maori became the birds themselves. Whistling like a kararu's coo could draw the plump pigeons within spear range, while mimicking the distress call of a piwakawaka would send smaller birds fluttering into carefully placed nets. The techniques were so effective that colonial observers wrote of their disbelief, mistaking skilled callers for supernatural beings who commanded the forest. What's heartbreaking is how quickly this knowledge faded. with deforestation silencing native birds and modern technology replacing traditional methods. Fewer than a dozen elders alive today retain the full depth of these practices. Some calls, like the eerie midnight chant used to summon the extinct huia, will never be heard again, but in remote valleys, efforts are underway to preserve what remains. Children in Maori immersion schools now learn basic bird calls as part of language revival, and bioacoustic researchers collaborate with tribes to archive these vanishing sounds. The hope isn't just to save a curiosity, it's to reclaim a language where every note was once a thread connecting people to land, to ancestors, and to creatures who shared their world. High in the rugged cliffs of Te Matau e Moi, the Rangitane people entrusted their most sacred duty to the wind and the stone, the hiding of their dead. These weren't ordinary graves, but secret burial caves known as Ana Tupapaku, hollowed by time into the earth's bones. Only a handful of elders today could point to their locations, and even then, only in whispers. The caves weren't chosen at random. Some faced the rising sun to catch the first light of Matariki, the Maori New Year, while others were tucked behind waterfalls, their entrances veiled by cascading water that purged all footprints. To stumble upon one by accident was considered both a blessing and a curse, a sign you'd been chosen to carry a message between worlds, but also a test of whether you'd honor the silence. What lay inside was more than bones. The Rangitane buried their ancestors with treasures that defied European notions of wealth. Carved staffs inscribed with star maps, cloaks woven with the feathers of extinct birds, and high tiki pendants made from paunamu so pure it glowed like trapped moonlight. But the most sacred items were the koiwi tangata, the skeletal remains themselves. Arranged in fetal positions to mirror their birth, these bones were painted with ochre mixed with shark oil, a concoction that preserved them for centuries while warding off malevolent spirits. Some skulls bore delicate carvings, intricate scrollwork telling the story of their life's journey. Yet none of this was meant to be seen. The caves were designed to collapse if intruders disturbed their balance, swallowing secrets rather than surrendering them. The rituals surrounding these burials were as precise as they were poignant. Bodies weren't carried directly to the caves but taken on convoluted routes meant to confuse the dead spirit, ensuring it couldn't find its way back to haunt the living. Mourners walked backward in certain stretches, their footfalls masked by bundles of damp fern. Only the tohunga responsible for sealing the cave's entrance knew the final path, and they took that knowledge to their own graves. There's a story of a European surveyor in the 1880s who boasted of finding such a cave near the Manawatu Gorge. By morning, his maps had vanished, his compass spun wildly, and his hair turned white as if bleached by unseen hands. The Rangitane say the land itself punishes those who break its oldest covenants. Today, the few who still guard these sites speak of them in coded terms. The place where the kokako sings at dusk, or the cliff that drinks the river's tears. Modern archaeologists using LIDAR technology have detected cavities matching the descriptions, but tribal law forbids their disturbance. Some caves are said to hum when certain karakia are recited nearby, a vibration felt in the chest rather than heard. Others have become accidental time capsules. When a landslide in 2012 exposed one briefly, workers reported the air smelling of manuka oil and something unmistakably alive. By the time elders arrived, the earth had already shifted, sealing the gap as if it had never been. The Rangitane's greatest teaching lies in this, that some secrets aren't meant to be uncovered, only respected. The caves aren't just tombs, they're living tapu, places where the boundary between past and present thins to a whisper. To know of them is to stand at the edge of a mystery even time hasn't dared to solve. When death came to the Maori, it wasn't met with silence, it was met with a cascade of voices rising like storm winds, each note a blade cutting through the weight of loss. The Waiata Tangi, or lament chants, were more than funeral songs. They were vessels of raw emotion, sculpted over generations to carry grief across time. Unlike European elegies with their structured rhymes, these chants thrived on spontaneity, bending to the shape of each mourner's pain. A mother might weave her child's laughter into the melody, while a warrior's lament cracked with the rhythm of battle cries he'd never shout again. The most powerful could make the earth itself shudder. Elders spoke of stones splitting when a tohunga's voice struck the right frequency of sorrow. Consider the story of Puhiwahine, a 19th-century composer whose laments still echo in the King country. When her lover was slain by a rival tribe, she didn't just sing of her grief, she weaponized it. Her Waiata Tangi named every injustice, her voice carving accusations so sharp that enemies miles away reportedly woke with unexplained wounds. But the true artistry lay in the duality of these chants. Between the lines of sorrow, skilled composers embedded hidden maps, directions to sacred springs where the deceased spirit could drink, or coded messages for future generations about land claims or unresolved vendettas. The Waiata Tangi wasn't just mourning, it was a living legal document, a compass for the soul, and a war cry all in one. Yet the most haunting were the oriri, laments for the dead so potent they were rarely sung more than once. These weren't rehearsed, they erupted in the moment, their lyrics pulling imagery from the surrounding world, a wilting flax bush for a life cut short, a fading star for extinguished potential. Some were so personal they became taboos. Families who lost children to drowning forbade certain chants near rivers, fearing the waters might remember and claim another. Others held cryptic warnings. In one recorded lament, a widow's reference to the cowhide tree that leans but never falls later proved to prophesy her clan's survival through a brutal land confiscation. What's devastating is how colonialism severed this thread of sound. Missionaries dismissed Waiata Tangi as heathen wailing, pressuring converts to adopt Sama hymns instead. By the early 20th century, many chants survived only as fragments in ethnographers' notebooks, stripped of their melodies and context, but in hidden corners resistance simmered. A cunning few disguised laments as lullabies, teaching children innocent-sounding tunes that secretly carried the names of stolen lands. Elderly women in Waikato were known to hum forbidden Waiata Tangi while weaving, their looms clicking like metronomes, keeping time for memories too dangerous to sing aloud. Today's revivalists face a mosaic of puzzles. Some chants resurface in unexpected places. An Australian museum's wax cylinder collection yields a mourning song recorded in 1894. Its singer long nameless until a descendant recognizes the cadence of their great-grandmother's cry. Others live on in mutated forms, like the protest Waiata of the 1970s that borrowed ancient dirge structures to mourn lost treaties. But the greatest challenge isn't reconstruction, it's the intangible heart of these laments. Modern singers can replicate every note, but without the weight of lived loss, does the Waiata Tangi still hold its power? Some elders argue yes, that grief, like the chants themselves, is a river. Its waters may change, but the current remains. Beneath the emerald canopy of Aotearoa's forests, every leaf, every root, every drop of sap pulsed with purpose. The Maori didn't just live among the plants, they conversed with them, unlocking secrets modern science is only beginning to verify. Take harak, the flax plant whose sword-like leaves sway in the coastal winds. To the untrained eye, it might resemble ordinary greenery, but to the elders, each part was a precision tool. The outer leaves, tough as leather, were stripped into fibers so strong they could bind waka holes or stitch wounds closed. The gel-like substance at the base, a natural antiseptic, smeared on burns to prevent infection long before the concept of germ theory existed. Even the nectar from its flowers wasn't merely sweet. It was distilled into eye drops to treat infections, with precise instructions to harvest only at dawn when the plant's potency peaked. Then there was kawakawa, the heart-shaped leaf often called Maori medicine cabinet. Its numbing properties made it the go-to remedy for toothaches. Chewing a single leaf could dull pain for hours, while brewed teas eased digestive ailments with an efficiency that rivaled modern antacids. But its true power lay in ritual. Tohunga would place kawakawa leaves in streams to purify water, believing the plant could absorb spiritual contamination. There are accounts of warriors bathing in kawakawa-infused waters before battle, emerging with wounds that reportedly healed twice as fast as those who skipped the ritual. Scientists later isolated compounds called myristicin and elemicin, now known to have anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial effects. The lesser-known Thai kuka, the cabbage tree, was a walking pharmacy. Its roots, boiled into a syrup, treated dysentery and diarrhea. The tender shoots provided vitamin C to ward off scurvy, while the fibrous leaves, when soaked and pounded, created casts for broken limbs lightweight yet sturdy enough to support healing bones. The tree's nectar-rich flowers attracted tui birds, whose presence signaled the ideal harvest time for medicinal use. This wasn't just observation, it was symbiosis encoded in tradition. Perhaps most astonishing was puriri resin, harvested from the tree's weeping wounds. When mixed with shark liver oil, it formed a salve that not only prevented gangrene but seemed to accelerate tissue regeneration. Early European settlers recorded cases of deep gashes closing within days when treated with this method, a phenomenon now attributed to the resin's high levels of flavonoids and terpenes. Yet the Maori knew something else, that the resin worked best when collected under a waning moon, a detail modern pharmacology can't yet explain. The tragedy is how much of this wisdom was dismissed as superstition. Colonizers, convinced of their own technological superiority, uprooted entire groves for farmland, unaware they were destroying libraries of living knowledge. Missionaries burned records of plant lore, branding it witchcraft. By the 20th century, many uses survived only as half-remembered fragments in old diaries or the muttered verses of elders too stubborn to forget. Today, a quiet revolution grows. Scientists partner with tribal healers to test ancestral remedies, confirming what the Maori always knew, that harak fibers exhibit natural antibacterial properties, or that kawakawa extracts show promise in treating antibiotic-resistant infections. Foragers relearn which plants signal clean water sources by their growth patterns, a skill that could save lives in disasters. The land still whispers its secrets if we're willing to listen. Every time a child learns to identify a healing leaf by its scent, or a chef revives recipes that once prevented vitamin deficiencies, the old knowledge breathes again. The plants never forgot their purpose. Perhaps now neither will we. The Waiata flowed like a river, smooth on the surface, but beneath, currents of defiance and hidden truth swirled in every note. To the untrained ear, these traditional songs might have sounded like simple melodies, but the Maori embedded layers of meaning so cunning that colonial censors often missed the rebellion unfolding right before them. Take the famous Ngāi Tahu, composed during the land wars of the 1860s. On the surface, it lamented a lost love, but those who knew the code heard differently. The gentle breeze in the lyrics wasn't nature, it symbolized invading surveyors, while the broken heart stood for confiscated tribal lands. Entire villages would sing it in plain hearing of British troops, their voices carrying warnings to allies miles away. Some Waiata functioned as musical newspapers, broadcasting events too dangerous to speak aloud. After the burning of Parihaka, survivors composed songs describing the attack with chilling precision, the exact number of arrests, the names of officers who gave orders, all disguised as verses about falling leaves and setting suns. The beauty lay in their ambiguity. If challenged, singers could claim innocence, pointing to the harmless surface meaning, but to those with the key, every metaphor was a dagger. One particularly sly composition compared greedy land purchasers to wood pigeons gorging on berries, their bellies so full they couldn't fly away from consequences. The satire was so sharp that decades later, descendants of those targeted still refused to sing it in certain company, but not all secrets were political. Waiata aroha, or love songs, carried intimate whispers meant only for lovers' ears. A reference to a specific hilltop or flowering plant could signal a midnight meeting place, while a seemingly innocent line about the moon's shy face might confess forbidden feelings. The genius was in the details, a slight emphasis on one word, a pause where none should be. Even the rhythm held meaning. Songs in triple time often marked celebrations, while irregular beats hinted at danger or grief. The most sophisticated codes appeared in orrery, lullabies that doubled as teaching tools. A mother might sing of a mythical hero's journey, but woven between the lines were directions to hidden freshwater springs or the medicinal uses of nearby plants, lessons that could save a child's life if they were ever lost. Some families had signature tunes whose verses changed subtly with each generation, becoming living archives of tribal history. A single orrery could preserve the names of forgotten battles, the migration routes of ancestral waka, even the best fishing grounds for each season, all disguised as bedtime stories. Today, ethnomusicologists painstakingly decode these layered messages, often relying on elders who remember the old contexts. What was once dismissed as folk art is now recognized as an ingenious communication system, one that outsmarted oppression by turning song into both shield and sword. The Waiata didn't just survive colonialism, they outwitted it, ensuring the truth would echo long after the singers were gone. Now, when modern performers resurrect these melodies, they're not just preserving music. They're deciphering a musical cipher, one note at a time. The rarest cloaks weren't woven from flax, but from the very breath of the sky, each feather a stolen piece of sunlight, stitched into patterns only the gods could fully decipher. Kahu Huru Huru, the feather cloaks of the Maori, weren't mere garments. They were wearable tapestries of mana, their creation a sacred alchemy of patience and precision. Imagine the labor, thousands of feathers from now extinct birds like the huia or the vibrant kaka, each plucked at just the right season to retain its iridescence, then tied individually to a woven flax base with threads so fine they vanished against the skin. A single cloak could take a lifetime to complete, its value measured not in hours but in generations. Some contained feathers collected by the wearer's great-grandparents, passed down like living heirlooms. The process began with a whispered plea to Tain Mahuta, god of the forest, for permission to harvest. Only certain feathers were chosen, the soft down of Keraru for sections requiring flexibility, the stiff quills of weka for borders that needed structure, and always the prized tail feathers of the huia, black as polished obsidian, reserved solely for rangatira or high-ranking chiefs. The weaver's hands moved with the rhythm of a chant, each feather's placement dictated by ancestral patterns known as kauhewai, swirling designs that mirrored the movement of water, wind, and stars. But the true mastery lay in the cloak's hidden layers. Between the flax fibers, artisans tucked fragments of scented bark or bundles of medicinal leaves, creating a garment that could soothe ailments or repel insects with its very scent. Wearing one was an act of power. When a chief donned their kahu huru huru, the feathers caught the light differently with every step, creating a shimmering effect that mesmerized onlookers. Some cloaks were said to change hue in response to their wearer's emotional state, darkening in anger or glowing softly during moments of wisdom. Their value was incalculable. Early European explorers recorded desperate attempts to purchase them, offering muskets or gold, only to be met with laughter. One particularly famous cloak, now housed in a Berlin museum, was reputedly traded for an entire schooner loaded with supplies, and even then the tribe later regretted parting with it. Today, fewer than 20 master weavers retain the full knowledge of this art. The extinction of key bird species and the near loss of traditional dye techniques have rendered authentic kahu huru huru almost impossible to recreate. Modern attempts often substitute dyed chicken or pheasant feathers, but connoisseurs spot the difference instantly. The artificial colors lack the depth of sunlight filtering through forest canopies. A handful of elders still teach the old methods, mixing feathers from protected native birds with ethically sourced alternatives. ensuring the designs survive even if the original materials are gone. In dimly lit workshops, apprentices learn to split flax fibers to the thinness of spider silk, their fingers bleeding until they develop the necessary calluses. For the Maori, every surviving cloak is a miracle, a defiance of time's erosion. When exhibited, they're often displayed behind glass, not out of cold preservation, but because the air around them is said to still hum with the karakia woven into their threads. To see one up close is to witness a language written in plumage and patience, a testament to a people who clothe themselves in the sky's own artistry. The feathers may no longer fly, but in these cloaks they remember how. The forest whispered secrets not meant for human ears, delicate chisel strokes that came not from any hand but from the moonlight itself. According to Maori elders, some of their most intricate carving patterns weren't conceived by mortal artists, but gifted in dreams by the patupea, the elusive fairy folk who danced just beyond the edges of human sight. These supernatural beings were said to dwell in mist-cloaked hills and hollow trees, their pale skin luminous as Pa's shell, their voices humming with the frequency of wind through rushes. While some tribes feared them as tricksters, master carvers spoke of them as mentors, appearing in twilight visions to teach designs too perfect to have sprung from human imagination alone. The evidence lingers in the oldest waranui or meeting houses, where certain panels bear motifs that defy explanation. Spiral clusters within spiral clusters, each line mathematically precise despite being carved with stone tools. Interlocking patterns so complex they create optical illusions when viewed from different angles, a technique modern geometry confirms as advanced tessellation. Most striking are the impossible joints, sections where wood appears to weave through itself without seams, as if the grain had been persuaded to grow that way. Even today's master carvers struggle to replicate these sections, leading some to wonder if the patupea shared knowledge beyond mere craftsmanship, perhaps an understanding of the material's very spirit. Stories passed down in the Aotearoa tribe describe how a carver named Rangi, lost in grief after his son's death, wandered into the Yawara ranges seeking oblivion. Instead, he stumbled upon a clearing where the trees bore living carvings that shifted when unobserved. There, a patupea woman with hair like spun mist pressed her palm to his forehead, flooding his mind with designs that pulsed like veins. When he awoke days later at his village's edge, his hands clutched a chunk of paunamu etched with patterns no tool in his possession could have made. The greenstone carving, now housed in Rotorua's museum, shows a sequence of birds morphing into fish, a visual metaphor for the cycle of life and death that became the cornerstone of his tribe's funerary art. But the patupea's teachings came with warnings. Carvers who shared the sacred patterns indiscriminately reportedly met eerie fate's tools that turned to dust, unfinished works that split overnight with sounds like laughter. Some designs were considered tapu to reproduce without ritual preparation, like the whakapapa, a coiled motif said to trap negative energy if carved incorrectly. The most potent symbols, like the manaya, a creature with the head of a bird, body of a human, and tail of a fish, were believed to act as guardians only when activated by specific chants. Without them, the carvings became hollow imitations, their power leaching away like mist under sunlight. Modern scholars debate whether the patupea were purely mythological or reflections of real encounters, perhaps with an earlier, technologically advanced culture lost to time. But for contemporary carvers like James Rickard, the distinction hardly matters. When he recreates ancestral patterns, he still leaves offerings of fragrant kawakawa leaves at his workspace, just in case the fairy folk choose to whisper again. After all, he says, the proof isn't in the folklore, it's in the wood. Study the way certain ancient carvings seem to glow under UV light, as if retaining traces of some luminous pigment no one can identify. Or how some meeting houses, when struck by dawn light at the equinox, cast shadows that perfectly replicate the missing segments of long-destroyed panels. The whakapapa might be myths, but their legacy lingers wherever grain and genius intertwine. Long before playgrounds had slides and swings, the tamariki, the children of the Maori, played games that sharpened their minds and bodies for the challenges of adult life. These weren't just pastimes, they were stealth training grounds disguised as fun, where every leap, throw, and sprint carried the weight of ancestral wisdom. Take Patoka, the spinning top game that seemed simple until you realized its true purpose. The tops, carved from dense wood or even whalebone, were whipped into a frenzy with flax cords, but the real test came in keeping them spinning while dodging opponents' attempts to collide and topple them. Warriors who'd played this as children later credited it for their battlefield reflexes, their ability to anticipate an enemy's strike as easily as they'd once tracked a careening top. Then there was Ngāi Tahu, the games of joy that secretly honed strategic thinking. One called Ngāi Tahu transformed a field into a living chessboard, where teams defended territories marked with woven flax circles while trying to score points by striking a central target. The rules shifted with each region's variations, forcing children to adapt on the fly skills that later served them in tribal negotiations and guerrilla warfare. Another game, Titi Toria, involved tossing and catching carved sticks in rhythmic patterns, but the true challenge lay in the chanting that accompanied it. Players had to synchronize their movements with increasingly complex lyrics, training their minds to multitask under pressure. Elders whispered that the best players could recite genealogies while flawlessly catching a dozen sticks in sequence. Perhaps most ingenious were the water games, like Manu Tukutuku, kite flying from canoes. Children balanced on the gunwales, steering massive kites made of ropo reeds over the waves while reading wind shifts that would later help them handle fishing nets or sails. The kites themselves were lessons in physics, their designs mimicking the wing shapes of native birds. A well-tuned Manu Tukutuku could predict weather changes by the way it tugged against its flax line, a skill passed down in rhymes still hummed by coastal fishermen today. But some games walked the line between play and peril. Wire or string figures crafted intricate webs between fingers, each pattern telling stories of ancestors or mapping constellations. The most advanced designs required memorizing sequences hundreds of steps long, with mistakes said to bring bad luck. There's a legend of a girl who misspent a string figure meant for navigation, her fingers fumbling the final twist only for her brother to later vanish at sea, his waka lost because the stars wouldn't hold their shape. After that, children practiced wire with solemn focus, their games threaded with the understanding that play could shape reality. The tragedy is how few of these games survive. Colonial schools banned many as distractions, replacing them with European sports that lacked the embedded teachings. Others faded when urbanization erased the open spaces they required. Today, cultural revivalists scour old diaries and oral histories to resurrect fragments. A Ngāi Tahu field rediscovered beneath a suburban park, a weathered spinning top in a museum storage, its once vibrant paint still faintly visible. When modern children play these revived games, something remarkable happens. Their movements echo ancestors they've never met, their laughter carrying echoes of a world where every game was a prayer, every toy a teacher. The tamariki may not know it, but when their hands catch a flying stick or send a top whirling, they're speaking a language older than memory, and the land remembers. Long before European ships dotted the horizon, the Maori wove a web of trade across the Pacific, so vast it defied the ocean's expanse. These weren't random voyages, they were precise, seasonal expeditions following currents and star paths known only to navigators trained from childhood. The prized Paunamu, New Zealand's sacred greenstone, traveled thousands of miles to places like Rarotonga and Tahiti, where chiefs offered rare treasures in return. Black pearls the size of thumbnails, delicate feather capes from Hawaii, even volcanic glass sharper than any metal. But the true genius lay in what wasn't carried. Maori traders memorized intricate chants describing the exact locations of Pounamu deposits, trading this knowledge like living maps. A single recitation could guide Polynesian craftsmen to jade-rich rivers generations later, creating an invisible economy of information. The voyages followed strict protocols. Canoes never arrived unannounced. Instead, they paused beyond the reef, waiting for a welcoming chant from shore. Gifts were exchanged in deliberate sequences, first food to acknowledge hospitality, then tools or ornaments to establish trust, and finally, the taonga, the most precious items, presented only after days of ceremonial feasting. European accounts dismissed these exchanges as primitive barter, missing the sophistication entirely. A single adze blade of Tahitian basalt might be traded for a pound of Pounamu, but the real transaction was the relationship sealed between lineages. These connections endured for centuries, with descendants honoring ancient trade pacts long after the original voyagers had passed. Evidence of these networks lingers in unexpected places. Archaeologists found a Rarotongan-style fishhook carved from New Zealand moa bone, while a Maori pendant surfaced in the Marquesas with a drill hole only achievable with Polynesian coral tools. Even language tells the story. The Maori word for blue, kikorangi, shares roots with Tongan and Samoan terms, likely adopted through contact with traders describing distant seas. The most compelling clues, though, lie in oral histories. One Ngāi Tahu legend tells of a navigator who brought back a sapling of the sacred Ohia lehua tree from Hawaii, planting it in a secret grove where its descendants still bloom, a living testament to voyages most historians swore never happened. What truly vanished wasn't the routes themselves, but the urgency behind them. When European metal replaced stone tools, the demand for Pounamu plummeted. Colonial borders turned open seas into forbidden crossings, yet in remote islands echoes persist. Elders in the Cook Islands still recount tales of the Greenstone people who came with the winter stars, while Maori families guard heirlooms of Polynesian origin, their provenance whispered like a sacred trust. Today, voyagers recreating these journeys report eerie synchronicities, uncharted currents matching ancient chants, or birds appearing precisely where legends said they'd guide. The ocean hasn't forgotten the paths. Perhaps it's been waiting for us to remember. To the untrained eye, the swirling red and black patterns winding across a Waranui's rafters might seem like mere decoration. But these kauhewai designs are anything but arbitrary. Each curve, each space between the lines pulses with ancestral memory. Like a fingerprint, no two are exactly alike. Their variations encode everything from a tribe's migration saga to the very heartbeat of creation itself. Take the koru, the spiral resembling an unfurling fern frond. While its symbolism of new life is widely known, few realize how its proportions shift meaning. A tightly coiled koru near the meeting house entrance might represent the tribe's distant origins, while larger, bolder versions along the ridgepole could signify key moments of expansion or conflict. The negative space between them wasn't empty, it whispered of the challenges overcome in those journeys, the silent gaps between generations. Some patterns served as mnemonics for sacred knowledge. The pakoti, a series of chevrons resembling shark teeth, didn't just symbolize strength, it mapped star paths used by navigators during the Great Migration. Certain angles between the teeth corresponded to celestial markers, allowing trained eyes to trace routes across the Pacific without a single written word. Similarly, the cape, a pattern resembling interlocking waves, encoded tidal patterns for specific fishing grounds. Carvers adjusted the wave height subtly to indicate seasonal changes, turning rafters into nautical charts that guided fishermen for centuries. But the most potent designs were those that told of cosmic beginnings. In the Wanganui region, one Waranui's kauhewai depicts Rangi and Papa, the Sky Father and Earth Mother, not as figures but as geometric abstractions. The black represents Ranganui's infinite expanse, the red echoes Papatuanuku's lifeblood, and the white spaces between them, often overlooked, symbolize their children straining to separate them and bring light to the world. These patterns weren't static. As sunlight moved through the meeting house, the shadows elongated certain elements, animating the story in real time. At midday during the summer solstice, a specific beam would align to cut the pattern in two, reenacting the moment of creation when Te Ao Marama, the world of light, was born. Colonial observers dismissed kauhewai as primitive art, unaware they were witnessing a visual language as sophisticated as hieroglyphics. Missionaries whitewashed many panels, erasing narratives in the name of civilizing the spaces. But the patterns refused to die. Some carvers hid rebel messages in their work, a broken spiral representing land confiscation, or a cluster of koru deliberately stunted to protest the suppression of Maori children's language. Others adapted, weaving Christian symbolism into traditional motifs to preserve them under new guises. A Waranui in the Bay of Plenty, for instance, features a kauhewai of crosses that, when viewed from the rear, resolve unmistakably into the sails of ancestral waka. Today, master carvers like Rangi Keeper are decoding these lost dialects. Infrared photography reveals how older pigments contained ground paunamu, causing certain patterns to glow faintly under UV light, likely signaling their heightened tapu. Digital analysis has exposed mathematical precision in designs long assumed to be freehand. Some kauhewai ratios align with the Fibonacci sequence, suggesting an ancient grasp of sacred geometry. Yet for all these discoveries, some meanings remain elusive. In Te Yowara, a meeting house retains a ceiling pattern so complex that modern mathematicians have mapped it as a topological knot, a shape theoretically impossible to create without modern computation. The elders simply smile when asked how their ancestors achieved it. Some knowledge, they say, wasn't meant to be written down. It lives in the hand that holds the chisel, in the eye that sees beyond the wood, in the stories that rise from the painted curves like mist off the river at dawn. When the Pleiades constellation faded from the winter skies, the Maori didn't mourn, they prepared. The disappearance of Matariki, the star cluster also known as the Seven Sisters, signaled a time of sacred darkness, a lunar month when the veil between the living and the dead grew thin. But what few outsiders realized was that the public feasts and star-gazing ceremonies were just the surface. Hidden beneath the communal celebrations lay intimate rituals so potent they were performed only under the cover of night, whispered from one generation to the next with the secrecy of a treasured recipe for survival. One such ritual unfolded in the deepest hours before dawn. Families would extinguish every hearth fire in the village, plunging their world into literal and symbolic darkness. Then the tohunga would kindle a new flame using the kore gum, a resin believed to hold the captured sunlight of summers past. This wasn't just practical, it was cosmological. The sparks were said to mirror the rebirth of the stars themselves, each flicker carrying the mana of ancestors returning with Matariki's reappearance. As the new fire spread from home to home, children were tasked with carrying embers in hollowed-out hue gourds, their small hands learning the weight of continuity. Meanwhile, in secluded forest clearings, women performed the taki motatia, a ceremony where they washed ceremonial stones in ice-cold springs while singing lullabies to the stars. The stones, chosen for their ability to retain warmth, were then placed in earth ovens with the first harvest offerings kumara, taro, and the prized aru fern root. As the food cooked, the stones absorbed prayers for the coming year's abundance. After eating, participants would press these stones to their foreheads, transferring the blessings directly into their skin. European observers later mistook these stones for primitive heating tools, unaware they were handling what the Maori called watu manawa, the heart stones linking physical and spiritual nourishment. The most clandestine rites belonged to the Kaishiaki, the guardians of specific stars within the Matariki cluster. Each star corresponded to a different aspect of life, Waiti to freshwater, Waita to the ocean, Yorurangi to the winds. The Kaishiaki of Tupuanuku, the star tied to Earth's bounty, would bury handfuls of soil from their ancestral gardens beneath young fruit trees, ensuring the land's memory of productivity wouldn't fade. Those who tended Pohutukawa, the star of the dead, spent the night in caves reciting the names of every tribe member who'd passed that year, their voices merging with the dripping echoes of stalactites as if the earth itself were repeating the list. Perhaps the most haunting practice was the Ngāi Tahu, the feeding of the stars. Before sunrise, elders would climb sacred peaks like Mount Tarawera, where they'd steam food in leaf packets, never letting the smoke rise straight, but directing it in spirals to mimic the Pleiades formation. The aroma was said to nourish the stars themselves, strengthening them for their journey back into the sky. But there was a catch. The food had to be prepared without salt, as its preservation properties symbolized clinging to the past. Matariki demanded release, a lesson that abundance required letting go. Today, as Matariki gains global recognition as Aotearoa's official New Year holiday, many of these deeper rituals remain closely guarded. Some elders still mark the festival's true pivot point, not the star cluster's return, but its departure weeks earlier, by planting Puwananga, the native clematis whose blossoms unfurl precisely when the stars vanish. Its white petals, they say, are the tears of Ranganui, the Sky Father, wept each year as his children, the stars, begin their long swim across the celestial ocean. To witness this congruence of earth and sky is to understand the Maori didn't just track time. They danced with it, their ceremonies less about observance than participation in a cycle as old as light itself. Before metal glinted in Aotearoa's sunlight, the Maori shaped their world with tools far more extraordinary: blades and needles whittled from the bones of giants. The moa, towering flightless birds that once roamed New Zealand in herds, provided more than just meat for early settlers. Their skeletons became the raw material for an entire technological revolution, with techniques so specialized that modern artisans struggle to replicate them. Picture a hunter carefully selecting a femur from a freshly harvested moa, not for its size but for the precise density of its midshaft, where the compact bone could be fractured into razor-sharp edges when struck at just the right angle. These weren't crude implements, fishhooks carved from moa leg bones curved with hydrodynamic precision, their surfaces polished with shark skin until they gleamed like porcelain. Spear points, some no thicker than a fingernail, flexed without breaking. An innovation modern materials science attributes to the unique collagen structure in moa bone that fossilization has since erased. The true mastery lay in the unseen details. Craftsmen exploited variations in bone porosity, using spongy skeletal regions for chisels that absorbed impact like shock absorbers, while dense cortical bone became tattooing needles so fine they left scars indistinguishable from modern steel. Some tools even incorporated the moa's natural biology. A rare type of awl made from inner ear bones retained traces of the bird's semicircular canals, creating hollow channels that doubled as pigment reservoirs for tattooing. But perhaps most ingenious were the composite tools. A surviving example in Canterbury Museum shows a moa rib split lengthwise, its hollow interior packed with heated tree resin mixed with volcanic glass dust, creating an early form of laminate stronger than the sum of its parts. This knowledge didn't just vanish with the moa's extinction around 500 years ago, it mutated under pressure. As bones grew scarce, artisans adapted by recycling old tools, sometimes reshaping a single moa bone artifact through multiple generations. A fishhook might be ground down into a pendant drill, then finally crushed into glue powder. Oral histories tell of bone libraries where prized fragments were stored in flax-lined pits, their locations remembered through chants that described landmarks now lost to deforestation. The last practitioners guarded their methods fiercely. One legend speaks of a tohunga who burned his entire workshop rather than teach moa bone craftsmanship to unworthy apprentices after the birds disappeared. Today, experimental archaeologists face maddening gaps in reconstructing these techniques. Modern emu bones, often used as substitutes, lack the moa's unique microstructure. Attempts to replicate the legendary singing needles, delicate bone pins that emitted musical tones when wind passed through their drilled holes, have produced only dull clicks. Yet tantalizing clues emerge unexpectedly. In 2018, conservators examining a 19th century cloak discovered microscopic moa bone beads undetected for centuries. Their drill holes so perfectly circular they suggest the use of a bow-powered tool centuries before such devices were officially recorded in Polynesia. The cruelest irony, the same ingenuity that made moa bone tools so advanced likely hastened their disappearance. Analysis of butchered bones suggests Maori hunters systematically targeted the largest, healthiest birds, precisely those whose bones would have made the finest tools. In the end, the technology may have consumed the very resource it depended on. Yet the legacy lingers in unexpected places. Contemporary Maori surgeons report that the hand posture for holding modern orthopedic drills eerily mirrors ancient carvings of moa bone workers. The ancestors' knowledge didn't vanish, it simply transformed, like a moa bone needle worn smooth from years of use, its original shape gone but its purpose enduring. History remembers the Maori warrior with his teaha raised and haka echoing, but half the story is missing. The Ngāi Tahu, the fierce women who stood shoulder to shoulder with men in battle, were erased from colonial records, their spears rewritten as domestic tools, their war cries dismissed as ceremonial songs. Yet tribal histories tell a different tale. Take the legend of Te Kapurangi, a woman of the Aotearoa who single-handedly turned the tide at the siege of Pohutukawa Bay. When enemy forces surrounded her pa, she climbed the palisades under cover of darkness, her body smeared with pungent kawakawa oil to mask her scent. With nothing but a short thrusting club, she silenced the sentries one by one, then signaled her tribe with the cry of a ruru owl, a sound that still strikes fear in descendants of those who survived that night. These women weren't anomalies, they were strategists. While men often fought in open combat, Ngāi Tahu specialized in guerrilla tactics. They camouflaged themselves with ferns and river mud, striking from wetlands where opponents hesitated to follow. Some mastered the art of patupora, weaving flax mats studded with sharpened shells that could be unfurled as instant defenses or rolled into concealed weapons. Their most feared technique, whakapapa, involved feigning retreat only to pivot with a concealed patu, a move so fluid it resembled a dance. European soldiers, expecting docile native women, wrote bewildered accounts of being disarmed by figures they'd mistaken for non-combatants until it was too late. But their power extended beyond the battlefield. Ngāi Tahu, like Hainachirama of Ngapuhi, served as military advisors, interpreting bird flight patterns and cloud formations to predict enemy movements. Others, like the famed Puhai of Waikato, commanded entire fleets of Wakatoa war canoes, navigating treacherous currents to flank opposing forces. Their tattoos told stories of prowess moko koi chin designs with added spear motifs, or subtle gaps in the patterns marking battles where they'd taken lives. These weren't just decorations, they were resumes in ink declaring lineage and lethal capability to anyone who could read them. The colonial erasure was systematic. Victorian anthropologists steeped in patriarchal views recast warrior women as tribal beauties or priestesses, softening their roles into passive archetypes. Museum curators labeled their weapons as digging sticks or kitchen implements, a practice still being corrected today. In the 1890s, when ethnologist Elston Best recorded oral histories, he deliberately omitted accounts of female combatants, considering them improbable. The few European artists who depicted Ngāi Tahu often portrayed them bare-breasted and sexualized, reducing them to exotic fantasies rather than honoring their tactical brilliance. Yet the evidence persists. In the Waikato Museum, a mirror with a handle worn smooth from a woman's grip sits beside European musket balls it deflected. Cave paintings near Lake Taupo show stick figures with unmistakably female forms carrying spears alongside men. Most telling are the skeletal remains female bones from pre-contact burial sites showing fractures consistent with combat, their forearms often thicker than male contemporaries from years of wielding patu. DNA testing on a set of teeth from the whare bar excavation revealed a woman who'd survived multiple skull fractures, her healed wounds mirroring those of modern boxers. Today's revival is rewriting history. Kurahopo Waka reenactments now feature Wahine Toa crews paddling alongside men, their strokes synchronized by ancient chants rediscovered in elders' journals. Martial arts schools teach reconstructed patu pora techniques, while young Maori women earn moko koi that incorporate ancestral battle motifs. When the government formally apologized for land confiscations in 2019, Ngāi Tahu negotiator Helmut Modlik intentionally seated female delegates beside male leaders, a visual echo of how their ancestors would have arranged a war council. Though Wahine Toa didn't vanish, they were biding their time, waiting for the world to remember. To the untrained eye, a traditional Maori flax cloak might appear as nothing more than an intricate mesh of woven fibers, but every cross, every twist, every deliberate gap in the pattern held a story waiting to be read. The art of raranga, or flax weaving, was far more than practical craftsmanship. It was a clandestine language, its geometric designs encoding everything from tribal histories to navigation routes, love letters to declarations of war. The weavers, usually women of profound status, were the keepers of this silent lexicon, their nimble fingers threading secrets into the very fabric of daily life. Take the simple tanako border found on prestigious cloaks, seemingly decorative bands of black, white, and red. Each color transition marked a specific event. Red might symbolize a battle where blood stained the rivers. Black could represent a period of mourning after an elder's passing, while white spaces between them told of peace treaties sealed under full moon. The spacing between the stripes wasn't arbitrary either. Narrower gaps indicated times of scarcity, while wider ones celebrated abundance. In one documented case, a 19th-century cloak's tanako was later decoded to match exactly with a tribe's oral history of migrations, every peak and valley in the pattern corresponding to a mountain crossed or a river forded during their journey. But the real genius lay in the wenu, the vertical foundation strands of the weave. By altering their tension or skipping certain threads, weavers could create tactile maps. A cloak gifted to a departing warrior might subtly guide him to safe drinking holes tight, raised rows indicating treacherous terrain, while softer, looser sections marked sheltered valleys. Others served as cryptographic records of land boundaries, with specific knot sequences denoting sacred springs or contested territories. These weren't just references, they were legally recognized documents. During early land court cases, Maori women would present woven mats as evidence, their patterns testifying to ancestral claims with a precision that baffled European officials reliant on paper deeds. The most sacred messages were reserved for Kit Whakairo, finely woven baskets made for spiritual leaders. Their intricate checkered patterns, called pautama, resembled staircases. A common misinterpretation is that they represented ascent to knowledge. In reality, their variations were mnemonic devices for reciting whakapapa genealogies. Each step stood for a generation, while diagonal breaks signaled marriages between lineages. A single basket could thus hold an entire family's history, readable only to those trained in its visual syntax. Missionaries, unaware of this function, often repurposed these kit as Bible carriers, unknowingly draping sacred genealogies over Christian texts. Perhaps the most poignant codes were those of rebellion. During the land wars of the 1860s, weavers in Taranaki created cloaks with deliberate errors, patterns that abruptly reversed or threads left dangling. To colonists, these appeared as flaws, but to the Maori, they signaled resistance. A cloak with a suddenly inverted triangle might warn of spies in their midst, while unfinished fringes hinted at interrupted traditions. One surviving artifact in Te Papa Museum shows a seemingly beautiful cloak that, when examined closely, reveals a single row of uneven crosses, a covert tally of lives lost at the siege of Rangiaoa. Deciphering these messages today is a race against time. The last master weavers fluent in the full symbolic vocabulary passed away in the mid-20th century, taking untold ciphers with them. Modern experts now collaborate with computer scientists, using spectral imaging to detect faded dyes and algorithmic pattern analysis to reconstruct meaning from fragments. In 2021, researchers at Waikato University discovered that certain historical cloaks reflect ultraviolet light in distinct sequences, suggesting weavers may have treated some flax with luminescent fungi to create hidden designs visible only under specific moonlight conditions. Yet for all these breakthroughs, the deepest lessons of Waranga endure in the hands of contemporary practitioners. When weavers today revive old patterns, they don't just replicate, they converse. A cloak woven for a child's graduation might embed the star coordinates of their home marriage, while a modern key destined for a museum might conceal QR codes within its traditional motifs, bridging analog and digital storytelling. The ancestors didn't just weave flax, they wove time itself into something you could hold, ensuring their voices would never truly unravel. Some taniwha slithered through legends as protectors, coiled in the depths with eyes like polished paunamu, while others lurked as shape-shifting tricksters who swallowed canoes whole on a whim. These water spirits weren't just monsters, they were the living pulse of their territories, as diverse as the lands they guarded. In the roaring rapids of the Waikato River, the taniwha karu tohai was said to have a single glowing eye that could hypnotize travelers, steering them away from treacherous currents. But venture to the misty pools of Te Yowara, and locals spoke of Hain Koroko, a taniwha who took the form of a giant eel draped in moss, her touch curing sickness if approached with the proper karakia. The true secret lay in how these beings defied categorization. To the Ngāti Watua, the taniwha Yorea was a benevolent guardian, her serpentine body forming the natural breakwater of Okahu Bay, shielding fishermen from storms. Yet that same creature, under a different name in Ngapuhi lore, dragged trespassers into whirlpools for disrespecting her waters. Some taniwha were even shape-shifting paradoxes, like Pain Arera of the Wanganui River, who could appear as a log floating innocently downstream before transforming into a scaled behemoth mid-current. The rules for encountering them were equally fluid. Tribes near Rotorua left offerings of greenstone pebbles to appease their taniwha, while those in Taranaki avoided whistling near certain lakes, believing the sound would summon a spirit's hunger. A few taniwha straddled the line between myth and memory. The massive taniwha Tamanamina was said to have carved the Manawatu Gorge with his thrashing tail, a story that aligns eerily with geological evidence of ancient landslides. Others left physical traces. Petroglyphs near the Waipoa forest depict a taniwha with star-like markings matching celestial navigation charts, suggesting some stories encoded lost sailing knowledge. But the most haunting accounts come from roadworkers in the 20th century, who reported machinery failing inexplicably near taniwha sites until elders performed unveiling ceremonies. One crew in the 1970s claimed their drills struck something that bled black fluid near the Waikato River, a phenomenon locals attributed to the taniwha hakucheri, said to flow through the land's veins like water. Today, these legends are more than campfire tales. Engineers consult tribal maps before dam projects, wary of disturbing taniwha habitats. A stretch of highway near Huntly famously detours around a taniwha's alleged path, a rare victory for oral tradition over concrete. Scientists even note curious parallels. Certain taniwha descriptions match prehistoric crocodile fossils found in New Zealand, hinting at ancestral encounters with now extinct creatures. Whether spirits, ecological metaphors, or something in between, the taniwha endure as reminders that the land's mysteries don't yield easily to logic. To know their stories is to navigate a world where every riverbend holds a secret, and respect for the unseen isn't superstition, it's survival. When the night sky cracked open with a streak of fire, the Maori didn't just watch, they listened. Comets weren't celestial accidents to them, they were urgent messages, their long tails carving warnings or promises across the heavens. The appearance of a comet or whakairo triggered immediate action. Village astronomers known as kairoruku would study its path, the angle of its tail, even the sound of the wind the night it appeared, comparing these details to centuries of oral records. A whakairo moving northwest might herald the arrival of strangers by sea, while one splitting into fragments could signal impending conflict between tribes. The famous comet of 1843, later identified as the Great March Comet, was recorded by Maori elders as Decode, the firebrand, its appearance coinciding with both devastating epidemics and the signing of pivotal land treaties. Eclipses held even deeper terror and reverence. A solar eclipse, Rakutanga, wasn't merely the moon blocking the sun, it was a cosmic battle between Ra, the sun god, and the dark spirit Tipo, who sought to swallow light forever. Villages prepared meticulously, food stores were secured, pregnancies were hidden from the open sky, and children were kept indoors to avoid the eclipse's tapu shadow, believed to carry curses. The Tohunga would chant specific karakia kokorangi astronomy incantations to strengthen Ra's resolve. These weren't random prayers, certain chants were timed to the eclipse's phases, their rhythms mirroring the sun's gradual return. Elders in the Chatham Islands described a chant so precise it ended exactly as the first sliver of light reappeared, a feat modern astronomers calculate would require meticulous celestial tracking. But the true genius lay in their predictive methods. Without telescopes, Maori observers used natural markers, the flowering of pohutukawa trees or the spawning cycles of inanga fish, to anticipate eclipses years in advance. Lunar cycles were mapped against the Maramataka calendar, with certain moon phases known to herald eclipse seasons. Rock carvings near Wangara depict a solar eclipse from the 1400s, its concentric circles showing not just the event but the sun's corona, details invisible to the naked eye unless observed through a water reflection, a technique later confirmed in oral histories. The tragedy, much of this knowledge was suppressed. Missionaries dismissed eclipse rituals as pagan panic, and colonial schools taught European astronomy as the only valid system. Yet fragments endure. In 2020, during a total solar eclipse over Rakiura Stewart Island, a group of Maori astronomers reenacted the Karakia Kokorangi, their voices rising precisely as the moon's shadow arrived. As the sun reappeared, an elder smiled. The chant's final syllable landed within seconds of totality's end. The ancestors, it seems, left more than stories. They left a celestial clock ticking silently in the stars. Deep in the riverbeds of Tiwai Paunamu, the South Island of New Zealand, Paunamu wasn't just a stone, it was the frozen tears of Pautini, the Taniwa who carried the goddess Waitaki to safety across icy waters. This sacred greenstone, polished by centuries of river current, held a mana so potent that wearing it as mere jewelry was just the beginning. Warriors knew its true value when fashioned into mere, the short striking clubs that could splinter bone yet never dull, their edges sharpened by prayers as much as sandstone. But the most powerful Paunamu tools weren't weapons at all. They were the toki, the adzes used to carve the first waka and shape the meeting houses where ancestors whispered from the rafters. Each strike of a toki was said to release the stone's hidden song, a resonance that guided the carver's hand beyond mortal skill. The stone's spiritual weight made it the ultimate seal of agreement. When tribes brokered peace, they didn't sign parchment, they exchanged Paunamu Hai Tiki, the stylized human figures whose contorted postures represented the tangled bonds of kinship. A broken treaty meant shattering the tiki, an act so taboo it was believed to summon instant retribution from the gods. There's a legend of two warring chiefs who buried a shared toki in the earth after making peace. Decades later, when one tribe violated the accord, a landslide unearthed the adze at the feet of the betrayer's grandson. The message was clear. Pounamu remembered what men forgot. Healers prized smaller fragments for their unseen properties. Tohunga ground Pounamu dust into salves for infected wounds, noting how it hastened healing, a phenomenon modern science attributes to the stone's trace lithium content acting as an anti-inflammatory. The translucent kawakawa variety, streaked with dark veins like forest shadows, was particularly potent. Worn against the skin during childbirth, it was believed to ease labor pains, while thin discs of Inanga Pounamu, pale as moonlit water, were placed over the eyes of the dying to guide their spirits home. Even the stone's flaws held purpose. Cracks filled with iron oxide called kokapu were thought to absorb negativity, acting as spiritual lightning rods for harmful energies. But perhaps the most startling use was as a living compass. Navigators carried palm-sized Pounamu pebbles etched with star maps, their surfaces reflecting celestial patterns when submerged in water at night. Certain translucent stones, when held to the sun at dawn, cast green-hued shadows that aligned with solstice markers on sacred peaks. European explorers mocked these greenstone toys until they witnessed a storm-blown waka crew correct their course using nothing but a Pounamu shard and the morning light. Today, commercially mined Pounamu floods souvenir shops, but the elders know the difference. True Pounamu isn't just dug up, it's gifted by the river when the tribe standing with the land is right. The rarest pieces still change hands in secret ceremonies, their passage unrecorded except in the weight of tradition. Some say if you press your ear to a freshly cut stone, you can still hear Pautini's mournful song, a reminder that this isn't just rock. It's solidified history waiting to be wielded again. In the ember-lit silence of the Aotearoa groves, where ancient puriri trees formed living cathedrals, the Tohunga performed rites so potent mere observation could unsettle the soul. These weren't the public ceremonies seen at Maori, but clandestine operations of the spirit rituals where fire didn't just burn, but listened. The kindling alone followed precise protocols, branches of manuka for purification, kanuka for strength, and never more than 9 sticks, a sacred number mirroring the layers of the underworld. As flames bit the wood, the high priests would begin the wakangao, a breathing technique that transformed their exhalations into fuel, making the fire rise and fall with their whispered prayers. One such ritual, the hapai ahai, involved passing bare hands through the blaze without injury, a feat European witnesses dismissed as trickery until they saw the flames recoil from the Tohunga's skin like mist from stone. The secret lay not in immunity, but in the karakia turangi, chants that altered the fire's behavior by vibrating at frequencies that disrupted heat convection. Elders spoke of masters who could extinguish flames mid-chant, leaving smoke swirling into shapes that foretold coming storms or tribal conflicts. More startling were the accounts of Aotearoa, eternal fires kept burning in hidden pits for generations, their ashes said to cure terminal illnesses when mixed with dawn dew. But the true test came during the Wakahiti Momea, the Dream Bridge ceremony. After fasting for 3 lunar cycles, initiates would ingest a paste of kawakawa leaves and glowing ember remnants, entering trances where they conversed directly with Atua like Tain Mahuta and Tangaroa. These weren't hallucinations, but carefully negotiated encounters. The priests carried verbal contracts etched into their memories, binding agreements about fishing rights, warfare outcomes, even the lifespan of unborn children. A single mispronounced syllable could rupture the accord, bringing consequences as tangible as failed crops or stillborn livestock. The most skilled emerged with physical proof, fern fronds impossibly threaded through their hair or salt water dripping from their fingertips though the nearest coast lay miles away. The most guarded rite was the Tuahu Pautumaro, a midnight trial where 7 Tohunga formed a human ladder, each standing on another's shoulders to reach the 11th heaven. Witnesses described their bodies stiffening into living totem poles, their combined chant summoning a wind that bent trees double yet left the priests untouched. Success meant glimpsing the future in the star's reflection on a bowl of whale oil. Failure could snap spines like kindling. When Christianity arrived, missionaries burned dozens of Aotearoa groves, unaware they were destroying botanical libraries. Certain plants used in these rites grew nowhere else. But fragments endure. In 2019, a wildfire near Wakatane mysteriously split around a stand of manuka where an Aotearoa once stood, its flames parting like a curtain. Locals knew better than to call it coincidence. Some doors between worlds, it seems, stay slightly ajar. Before synthetic pigments brightened fabrics and inks, the Maori transformed roots, bark, and even insects into colors so vivid they seemed ripped from the sunset itself. The art of creating natural dyes, or takiri kara, was a process as precise as alchemy, one that demanded intimate knowledge of seasons, soil chemistry, and the subtle shifts in a plant's potency as the moon waxed and waned. Take the rich crimson extracted from hinau bark, harvested only after the first frost when the sap's sugars concentrated near the surface, then fermented in seawater for exactly 28 days, a lunar cycle, until the liquid darkened to the shade of freshly spilled blood. This wasn't just dye, it was a living entity, its vibrancy tied to the rhythms of the earth. The most coveted hues came at a cost. The Ngāi black used for tattooing, pango, required burning kori gum over white hot stones, then capturing the resinous smoke on flax pads, a process that filled the lungs with acrid fumes and left workers coughing up soot for days. Warriors prized this pigment not just for its depth but for its spiritual resonance. The carbonized gum carried traces of ancient forests, embedding ancestral strength into every tattoo line. For weaving, yellow came from the delicate cowhide flower petals, but only those picked at midday when their flavonoid content peaked. A single cloak could consume 10,000 blossoms, each hand plucked and simmered in a wooden trough with totoki berries to fix the color against fading. But the rarest shades defied logic. A luminous blue-green, reserved for the cloaks of high chiefs, came from an unlikely source, the bile of kura freshwater crayfish. Catching them in autumn when their digestive enzymes were strongest, dyers painstakingly extracted the liquid from hundreds of crustaceans, blending it with fermented puriri leaves to stabilize the volatile hue. The result shimmered like peacock feathers, a color so unstable that surviving examples in museums still shift between turquoise and emerald under different lights. The process was as sacred as the outcome. Dyers worked in secluded paharak, flax groves where strict tapu governed every action, no speaking above a whisper, no entering after eating meat, and absolutely no menstruating women near the vats, as their presence was believed to bleach the dye's potency. Certain patterns, like the deep maroon stripes on kaitaka cloaks, required chanting specific karakia while stirring the dye with a totoki stick, the rhythm syncing with the bubbling bruised tempo. Elders claimed the dyes listened, their final intensity reflecting the dyer's spiritual state. Colonization unraveled this knowledge thread by thread. Synthetic dyes arrived in glass bottles, their convenience overshadowing the labor of natural hues. Missionaries discouraged the old methods as pagan, and by the 20th century, only a handful of elders retained the full recipes. The loss extended beyond color without the traditional dyes, the symbolism woven into garments blurred. A cloak's black triangles, once dyed with iron-rich mud from battle sites, lost their connection to ancestors' blood when replaced with chemical blacks. The red in Tanako borders, originally from horapito berries, no longer carried the plant's natural antimicrobial properties that protected garments from mildew. Yet whispers of the craft persist. In a secluded Taranaki workshop, weaver Rangi Karatu revives the old ways, tracking lunar phases to harvest harak for dye at the precise moment its cellulose breaks down into perfect fibers. Her latest experiment, recreating the legendary kakariki green, a shade once made from grinding rare paunamu dust into kokawai ochre by substituting fragments from a broken heirloom pendant. Nearby, tattoo artist Hone Ngata decodes century-old journals, discovering that the faded moko on colonial-era photos aren't due to poor technique, but the loss of paru, the iron-rich mud that bonded the ink to skin at a molecular level. The revival isn't just about authenticity, it's about resurrecting a dialogue with nature. Modern spectrography reveals how traditional dyes self-repair. Koromiko yellow brightens when exposed to sweat oils, while tenkaha bark red deepens under UV light, as if responding to the wearer's journey. Each hue is a covenant between people and land, a reminder that true color isn't applied, it's awakened. The ancestors didn't just see plants and minerals. They saw potential waiting to be released by hands that knew the earth's secrets. And in scattered workshops across Aotearoa, those hands are learning to speak again. For centuries, the relationship between the Maori and Maori peoples has been shrouded in misconception, a tangled web of colonial distortions, oral histories, and questions that linger like mist over the Chatham Islands. The Maori, long misrepresented as a primitive pre-Maori people, were in fact an offshoot of early Polynesian settlers who developed a unique pacifist culture in isolation. Their story isn't just a footnote, it's a mirror held up to the complexities of migration, adaptation, and the brutal consequences of outside contact. The connection begins with shared ancestry. Genetic studies confirm the Maori descended from the same East Polynesian voyagers who settled mainland Aotearoa around the same period, likely around the 13th century. But where their Maori cousins flourished in the resource-rich islands, the Maori adapted to the harsh, wind-swept Chathams by forging an extraordinary social contract called Nanuku's Law, named after their visionary leader who banned warfare and violence entirely. Their meeting houses bore carvings not of warriors but of seabirds and waves, reflecting a society that measured strength in sustainability, not conquest. Yet history took a cruel turn when Maori from Taranaki, displaced by the musket wars, invaded the Chathams in 1835. They encountered a people who hadn't raised a weapon in generations. The Maori, upholding Nanuku's law even in the face of annihilation, were decimated, a tragedy later twisted by colonial propagandists to paint Maori as aggressors and Maori as a dying race. This false narrative served a sinister purpose. It justified land confiscations by suggesting Maori themselves were invaders, not indigenous peoples. The truth, many Maori today trace Maori ancestry, and reconciliation efforts like the 2020 repatriation of stolen Maori remains are rewriting this painful chapter. The most haunting evidence lies in language. Maori's unique dialect, now revived after being declared extinct, preserves archaic Polynesian words lost in mainstream Maori. Their word for placenta, huri, matches ancient Tahitian rather than modern Te-Reo Maori, a linguistic fossil hinting at divergent paths from a common root. Even their star lore holds clues. The Maori constellation Te-Raki, unknown in Maori astronomy, aligns with celestial markers used by Rarotongan navigators, suggesting an alternate migration route frozen in time. Today, Maori and Maori are reclaiming their intertwined legacy. On Decode, the Maori's ancestral name for the Chathams, elders teach children the whakapapa, a genealogy chant that links them back to shared Polynesian forebears. Carvers reintroduce traditional Rakau Mamori, the sacred tree engravings depicting Maori's ocean-focused cosmology. And in a powerful act of atonement, Maori tribes like Ngāti Mutunga now partner with Maori to protect the Chatham's fragile ecosystems, honoring Nanuku's law in spirit if not blood. The real secret isn't just that these cultures were connected, it's that their reunion cracks open a door to understanding how indigenous peoples navigated change, conflict, and survival long before outsiders penned their stories. The Maori weren't a lost people, They were keepers of a radical peace, their whispers on the wind finally being heard again. From the air, the terraced hills of Aotearoa seemed to ripple with ancient geometry, curving ditches, zigzagging palisade lines, and concentric rings carved into the earth like faded tattoos. These are the past sites, the fortified villages where Maori ancestors lived, fought, and thrived for centuries. While their defensive brilliance is well known, strategically placed on cliffs, engineered with maze-like entrances to confuse invaders, what lies beneath the surface tells an even richer story. Recent ground-penetrating radar has revealed subterranean networks that rewrite our understanding of daily life in these strongholds. Hidden storage pits, some still holding preserved kumara from centuries past, suggest these weren't just forts but bustling hubs of agriculture and trade. Take the sprawling pa at Mongakiki, once home to thousands. Archaeologists found not just weapon fragments but delicate bone needles and carved spinning weights, evidence that these terraces hosted weavers and artisans even during times of conflict. The soil layers tell a layered tale, burnt wood from sieges alternating with fishbone-rich deposits from prosperous feasts. Some pits contained curious clusters of heated stones, arranged in patterns that match descriptions of umu tai underground ovens used to cook the carbohydrate-rich cordyline root, a wartime staple that could feed a garrison for months. But the real revelations come from the palisades themselves. Traditional accounts depicted these walls as simple timber barriers, yet excavations show they were dynamic, evolving structures. Post-hole patterns indicate some sections could be rapidly dismantled and reassembled, allowing defenders to alter the battlefield geometry mid-conflict. Others bore charring only on their interior faces, proof that Maori warriors sometimes lured attackers inside before igniting trapdoors filled with flammable resin. Even children played a role. Clusters of smooth pebbles found near defensive platforms suggest young ones stockpiled ammunition for slingshots, their small hands contributing to the village survival. What's most striking are the whispers of lost technology. At the past site in Taranaki's Pukerangira, researchers uncovered a buried cache of papahu sounding stones that, when struck, emitted tones at frequencies that carried for miles. These weren't musical instruments but an early warning system, tuned to specific pitches that communicated enemy movements across valleys. Nearby, a sunken trench contained hundreds of prickly tara vine segments strung on deteriorated fibers. Oral histories confirm these were planted atop walls as organic barbed wire, their venomous thorns discouraging climbers. The greatest mystery lies in the pa's water systems. At Aotearoa near Auckland, aerial lasers exposed a network of clay-lined channels fed by hidden springs, an ancient plumbing system that could withstand sieges. But the engineering marvel, some channels abruptly reverse gradient, defying gravity until you account for lunar tides. The builders had harnessed subsurface water pressure that fluctuated with the moon, creating a self-regulating supply that rose during droughts. Modern hydrologists estimate such systems required surveying skills rivaling today's engineers, all achieved without metal tools. Yet for all these discoveries, the pa's full story remains half-buried. Colonial farming flattened countless sites, and early archaeologists often prioritized treasure over context, skipping the humble fishhooks and fire pits that reveal the rhythm of daily life. Today, Maori-led projects are flipping the script. Using 3D modeling and soil chemistry analysis, they're reconstructing everything from seasonal fishing patterns to the exact spots where elders held council under the stars. Each handful of dirt holds voices waiting to be heard, not just of warriors, but of grandmothers storing medicinal herbs in hollow posts, children trading obsidian marbles between battles, and sentries humming lullabies to stay awake on moonless nights. The pa weren't just strongholds, they were living puzzles, their solutions etched into the land itself. From hidden astronomical wisdom to the sacred language of woven flax, these 30 forgotten secrets reveal a truth far greater than the sum of their parts, that the Maori were never merely survivors but visionary architects of knowledge. They weren't just navigating oceans, they were charting the unseen currents between the physical and spiritual worlds. Each secret we've uncovered, whether it's the celestial precision of Maramatoka lunar calendars, the healing power of Paunamu, or the guerrilla brilliance of Ngāi Tahu warriors, paints a single stroke in a masterpiece of resilience. This wasn't just a culture, it was a living dialogue with the earth itself, where every stone, chant, and carved spiral pulsed with intention. Consider how these pieces interlock. The same hands that shaped moa bone into surgical tools also carved meeting house panels that doubled as star maps. The ancestors who memorized trade routes across the Pacific also engineered viewer storage pits that kept food fresh for decades. Even their games were lessons in physics, their love songs encrypted with land boundaries, their burial caves designed to collapse like vaults guarding sacred blueprints. This wasn't scattered ingenuity, it was a holistic philosophy where art, science, and spirituality refused to be separated. Now these secrets whisper to us through time. You can hear them in the rhythmic chiseling of contemporary carvers reviving lost patterns, or taste them in the smoky earthiness of a hangi feast prepared the ancient way. Across New Zealand, from the geothermal valleys of Rotorua to the misty fjords of Fiordland, the land itself feels alive with these stories. Walk the trails of the Tongariro Alpine Crossing, and you're tracing paths once navigated by star-chanting Tohunga. Hold a freshly carved high tiki, and your fingers brush against the same Paunamu that once sealed tribal treaties. But the journey doesn't end here. Museums like Te Papa in Wellington or the Waitangi Treaty Grounds offer immersive encounters with taonga that defy glass cases. They seem to vibrate with the energy of their makers. For those who can't travel, the digital archives of the Maori Dictionary Project or Ngāi Tahu Sound and Vision bring Karakia and Waiata straight to your screen. And if one secret resonated with you, whether it's the engineering marvel of Pa fortifications or the botanical genius of Rongoa medicine, let that curiosity lead you deeper. Share your favorite revelation in the comments, or better yet, ask a local elder about it. The most guarded knowledge often reveals itself to those who approach with respect. So take this not as an ending but an invitation. Press your palm to the earth where these stories took root. Listen for the echoes of waka holes slicing through midnight waves, for the laughter of tamariki playing games that trained them to outthink the future. The ancestors didn't bury their secrets to keep them hidden, they buried them to see who'd care enough to dig. Now that you've glimpsed the map, will you follow the trail? Subscribe as we unravel more historical mysteries, and remember, history isn't just something you learn, it's something you stand inside, breathe in, and carry forward. The choice is yours. Kia hora te marino, may peace be widespread and curiosity even more so.